All right. Uh, we're going to have the steering committee meeting now. I see Kubota-san will have to leave in approximately 40 minutes. The good news is I think this will be a relatively quick steering committee meeting. We're going to talk about the launch of the public comment period for the proposed updates, and that uses the new process instituted by the board approximately 6 months ago, which built on our previous public comment period, but changed the public comments from 6 weeks to 6 months and the freeze period from 2 weeks to 3 months, with the intent, given our scale, of allowing more people to see proposed updates before the steering committee formally votes on enacting them. So the public comment period started on the 19th of June and will end on the 19th of December. When it ends, we'll move into a freeze period, and that freeze period will therefore end in Q1 2025. At that juncture, basically around the first board meeting of next year, the board will formally make a vote on whether to accept proposed changes to the new standards and make a decision about when and if to submit them to ISO. As a quick reminder, our rule of thumb guide has been to seriously consider updating the standards once every 5 years. This timescale puts the update to ISO 5230 exactly into that window. If we drop it into ISO for an update in Q1 2025, we can expect it to probably update towards the end of that year, which is precisely 5 years since the original grant 2020. Security would be approximately 2 years into its lifespan. And previously the board mentioned that consideration of an update at an earlier juncture would be because it's a fast-moving market, and we may want to consider updates to reflect that. Now, before we dig into a quick look at the changes that are being proposed between the standards, I just wanted to mention that the chair of our spec work group is on the line and didn't have a chance at the last meeting to join our discussion on steering committee because we deferred it due to time constraints. And I just wanted to formally welcome Chris Wood from Lockheed Martin as the elected chair since April of specification work group. He was previously co-chair for the year before that, along with Helio of Cariad. Chris, perhaps if it's okay, you'd like to say just a couple of words about yourself so the board can formally greet you.
Good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. About myself a little bit, I've been working in the open source arena for about 25 years now, both with licensing and security. So I've felt pretty comfortable in working with the team over the last few years. And when an opportunity arose to take the co-chair position, I certainly volunteered for it. So I think I'm adding value to the proposals, but I'm trying to encourage everyone to contribute to our processes as we're building them. I have seen a lot of it. I also participate in the ISO EC process for cybersecurity, and I also work in our national body specification group as well in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. So there's so much going on in artificial intelligence right now, both at the national body and the ISO levels, that it's getting to be too difficult to keep up with all the changes they're making to their specifications. So I've been kind of scaling back a little bit, but anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from as far as the work with the Linux Foundation goes.
Thank you, Chris. And I just wanted to say that you've been a tremendously stable hand in providing key input into the development of the security work, and also insights into how over multiple decades standards and politics around standards have operated. So Jimmy, if it's okay, I'd suggest you lead a formal welcome to the ecosystem for Chris as our new chair.
Yes, Chris, you're most welcome. It's great to have you. It's great to see that we get this continuity with you continuing, and I'm sure that you will continue the fine work that you have been doing and the fine work that will be done from the specification meetings I've been able to attend. I've been most impressed with your work, and I consider us lucky to have your engagement in this. I think we personally and the project, I think we're all better off for your involvement.
Well, thank you very much. I'm a little humbled by that, but I appreciate it. One thing I would like to kind of suggest to the whole board while we're thinking about it is thinking about a way to grow a licensing and security assurance expert or two within each one of the major companies that's participating in organizations to kind of serve as technical bridges between the engineers who are developing the software and legal. So when issues come up with licensing, they can explain what the licensing does in respect to that particular piece of software. I've found that that's been very valuable, and I've been able to play that role quite effectively for quite a number of years now. So I think it's something that all of the organizations should consider trying to do, because when the bottom line comes out and we have a licensing spec, it's not up to just the attorney. Your attorney really needs your input, especially if the licenses affect them in that way. So I just thought I'd put that bug in your head and let you mow on it. That's all.
I think those are some great things. I certainly wish that we would have that within our organization.
One thing we might borrow from Nithia's team over at Amazon, and I noticed Volvo has replicated it with success, and it seems to be spreading across the industry, is instituting some form of ambassador program where someone in a company takes some lead or responsibility for advocating for point X. So open source ambassadors seem to have gained traction. Maybe we can seek to bring people into our fold, but also use them as multipliers in their companies by exploring some form of ambassadors around open source business process management and standardization. Just a thought. Right. Well, let me show you what Chris and the team have done. Now, bear in mind, around 2 years on this. So copy pasting the slide into the chat in case people want to follow along and don't have their computer's window open. Our current ISO standard is linked on this slide, as is the next generation draft, which is the form in the pre-public comment period. The public comment period is not intended to change it dramatically. It's limited to grammatical and spelling errors. It's not an editing process, but it is a chance if something is horribly wrong for people to flag it and for us to fix it. So you can find the current ISO standard and the draft future one on slide 64, you will note, with Chris's leadership, all open issues have been closed by the specification workgroup. So every comment we have received in 5 years on this standard has been closed. Now, I wanted to show you some of the examples of what's changed, because I think it's quite exciting how it's been done. And it's exciting because it's not too exciting. An iterative
Can I make a
approach,
quick question about it?
of course.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. Just going back to the previous slide, I think it's the major version up from the OpenChain spec 2.1 to 3.0. And is it only applicable to the major version up, or just the minor version up is also applied? And also the second question is that what is the standard that the major version up and the minor version up? Yeah, and that would be the question to the Chris rather than Shane. Yeah.
Well, perhaps I should interject by outlining our process. So OpenChain licensing generation 1 was the pre-ISO draft, and generation 2 was intended to go to ISO. So basically, OpenChain 1, generation 1, had several iterations. It was pre-ISO, we were iterating quickly. We went to generation 2, and it was intended to just be OpenChain generation 2. But in the prep process, we had a reason to make a more substantial change, so we marked it as 2.1. And 2.1 is what became the ISO standard. But in general, the idea was once we went to ISO, we just do generational updates. And that's why this update, which has completed the editing process, is version 3.0. The 3.0 is just to keep the editing document versioning system in line with previous process, so people don't have to get any surprises with suddenly a version system change. But it is intended that this is a next generation update and not a fractional update. And it's not intended that we have fractional updates in future. Those are an item from the past.
Oh, okay, thank you. So my understanding is that we are now the generation 2, and so there will be no minor version up, and so OpenChain will be in line with the international standard, and the major version up and the version up process of this will be just implemented in the future. Is my understanding right?
The current ISO standard is OpenChain 2.1.
Yeah.
And in future, each ISO standard should just be version 3.0, version 4.0, not iterative small changes. And the proposed draft is 3.0, and it has completed all editing. There's currently no indication that there would be any change to the number before it would become potentially an ISO standard. When it becomes an ISO standard, it would still be ISO 5230. The only difference is it will change from ISO 5230:2020 to having ISO 5230:2025, if that's when we update it.
Okay, yeah, now I'm understanding. Thank you.
Perfect. And apologies that we have some legacy update approaches. It really comes from the fact where we were 7 years ago, 8 years ago. With generation 1 wasn't an ISO standard. It iterated quickly. Generation 2 was intended to just be 2.0, but in the very final cycle, after we were thinking we're wrapping up, a change was required and Mark EC iterated to 2.1. But from now on, it should just be 3, 4, 5, and those go into ISO because the editing process is not about iterating version numbers, just generations. An example of what we're doing. Here's an example, suggested change. basically reordering some of the items in the standard. And you don't have to read this in detail. Nothing has changed in terms of the categories, just the order in which they've been placed has been changed for greater clarity based on feedback from the community and extensive discussions on our monthly North America, Europe and North America, Asia calls. The purpose is to make the logic of reading easier. Another proposed change is to clarify some language that had the potential for misunderstanding. So for instance, we wanted people to check if software contained open source components, but the phrasing in the ISO standard, oh, my apologies, this is reading the wrong number. The phrasing in the ISO standard was reading potentially incorrectly. The phrasing was reading for some people as the standard applies to software that only contains open source. So, a set of open source licenses identified of identified open source components from which the supplied software is comprised. In translations and non-native speakers, there was potential for some lack of clarity there, and there were some queries about it, people asking, what does it mean? So the change was to adjust the final part, and change is comprised, oh, and apologies, there's a grammatical error that'll be fixed there, to may contain. So in other words, from is comprised to may contain, to make it super clear that what we meant was that the software, regardless of whether it was only open source or apparently only proprietary, should be checked. We continue with, again, clarification changes like this, just fix the version number, where previously, this is from when we created the standard 2015, 2016, SPDX was the only bill of materials really discussed around open source. But now bill of materials not only have multiple formats, but requirements from governments explicitly saying they want bill of materials. So instead of using SPDX to essentially say it is something that creates a bill of materials, we now have people knowing that they need bill of materials. So in the definitions section, to call out bill of materials and to give an example. In other words, the industry matured and the language around that matured as well. Moving on to the next item, which is a bit more wordy, and I do apologize for that. But the thing that matters in this section 341 is actually in the rationale. And in the rationale, it said to ensure reasonable commercial efforts have been instituted in the preparation of compliance artifacts. And that was changed to ensure reasonable efforts. And the reason is simple enough. Because not only companies, not only commercial entities are using our ISO standard. We have non-commercial entities such as NGOs and governments. And in some or many jurisdictions, the phrasing of reasonable commercial effort, which is clearly understood in the US market, is not clearly understood in other jurisdictions, especially when you're talking about a non-commercial entity. The definition of what is reasonable remains in the jurisdiction. The clarification that we mean reasonable regardless of commercial or governmental or else is the important point. And the final one, which is the biggest one I wanted to flag, is related to duration. When we started OpenChain, duration was an important topic. And I recall Mark Giese and other parties building consensus on a duration of 18-month renewal cycle. Essentially, every 18 months, people should check if they meet the requirements of the standard. Now, there was discussion about that at the time, about not making it too short and burdensome, and also having it outside of annual review cycles to ensure that compliance wasn't just lost in the massive annual or biannual or triannual renewals of standards across a corporation. To some degree, this is a product of the time. When this standard was drafted in 2015, when it was finalized in 2016, when it was launched in October 2016, open source license compliance was still not a fully formed topic. It was perhaps more important in those days to try to create ways to make sure people couldn't forget about it. However, feedback today, 2022, 2023, 2024, is that an annual cycle or similar review period makes more sense. Our ISO standard is just another ISO standard. If people have a portfolio of ISO standards in an annual renewal cycle, it's weird if we're out of cycle. Now, the suggestion of every 12 months is indicative of that desire that we received feedback on. And I should say the intent here is annual cycle, and the steering committee should be aware that ISO standards have different annual based cycles, like ISO 9001 is triannual, every 36 months. So it's possible that we might concur with the community that annual cycle is good, but we don't want 12 months, we want 24, we want 36. But that's a decision for another day. I wanted to put in front of you what the community feedback was thus far. So that's the type of changes. And I said I was excited about these changes because you'll see that apart from the renewal cycle, primarily it's been about logic, it's been about multi-jurisdiction, it's been about clarification, especially for non-native speakers. In other words, the proposed update is designed to improve the standards, but not substantially change them, which appears to align with the board's desire for where we go. Jimmy's dropping off. Catch you later, Jimmy. I want to check if the parties on this call have any comments about that, if they have any concerns about what they're seeing regarding ISO 5230. I have another comment, another observation. Apart from direct comments on the material you've just seen in front of you, do you have any other observations regarding our ISO standard for license compliance at this juncture? Because the steering committee's role is to provide final stewardship and control over this standard. You're now seeing what the community has been saying. Question is there anything additional that you would like to say at this juncture? If there's nothing additional, I will flag that we are approximately 9 months out from a formal decision on the proposed changes. In the public comment period, we'll be catching any grammatical or spelling areas, like we saw one a minute ago in these slides. And we will be therefore having 2 more steering committee meetings to look at the changes, to discuss the changes. And we will have one steering committee meeting to vote finally. Kubota-san has a side note that he wants to use GitHub diffs in future on these documents. Yes, Kubota-san, I'm delighted to work with you on this. In this particular meeting, what I wanted to do was to give an overview and show some of the changes that might catch people's eyes. But in the next meeting, I would love to run through the diffs. I mean, in the next two meetings, actually, so we can really dig into it. And ideally, with your assistance and with Chris's assistance, we can walk through what's there in more detail. This meeting is first setting the context. Okay. Review of suggested changes to the security standard. Exactly the same as the licensing standard. You can see the current one on the next generation draft. You can note all the open issues have been closed by the spec group. You can note that the public comment period has been launched as per the process created by the board, and it'll be followed by a 3-month freeze period. This is slide 70. And I wanted to show you, just like the license one, some of the changes on the table. One is just improving readability. So under standard practice implementation, basically keeping the same requirements, but completely rewriting how we describe them. This is essentially because people have identified that readability on the first version was a little tough, especially for non-native speakers, and the second version easier to read. If you're curious about why 4.1.5 in the ISO standard is standard practice implementation and 3.1.5 is standard practice in the draft for the next gen, it has to do with an extra notation section that ISO put into the security standard, not a change of requirements, not a set of extra requirements, not a section of extra terms. So in this case, making the language better for non-native speakers. Second one, again, trying to make the response to inquiries clearer and easier to read, to make sure that it's scoped nice and tightly, and that it uses the type of structure that was used elsewhere in the document. So again, not changing the requirement, just making it utterly clear what the requirement is based on feedback where people had some difficulty in reading, particularly non-native speakers. Next one is an interesting one, security assurance. More changes here. And this is something that Chris helped throughout, but Chris helped basically by citing an example of the type of process to deal with known vulnerabilities. So without making it a requirement, to have more clarity in what we mean when we say have a method for detecting known vulnerabilities. We're talking more specifically about what that means, having a risk or impact score using a process such as X. In other words, we tighten the language to help people understand more clearly what they might need to do in consideration of execution without making that a requirement. We also improved the language in terms of customer agreement with what you're doing around security assurance. In the ISO standard as it stands, we require customer agreement if necessary, which was read by some people as required regardless. Now we make it super clear that we mean if required, obtain customer agreement, not a change of terms, but a change of readability that ensures misunderstandings are less likely to occur. And finally, duration. Previously, in alignment with the licensing spec at 18 months, now in alignment with the desire of the community to move to annual style cycles. As before, that could be annual as proposed by the community, or it could be biannual or triannual. That's a matter for 9 months down the line. But what is clear is there is a community desire to consider annual instead of 18-month periods. All right, pausing there. What's your impression of where we've been going with the standards on community feedback? No decisions are needed at this juncture. It's the public comment period. But as you can see, the overall thing has been refinement. And apart from the duration change, no particular change to the requirements, which should mean an easy upgrade path. But your optics, your first of mind opinions are very valuable at this juncture to help with the considerations of where we need to go with the next steering committee meeting. If there's no particular opinion expressed, it's understandable because no decision is required at this junction. But it is valuable to put this in front of you so you know exactly what's going on. And we had some board members request that we ensure we look at the primary changes such as today. And to Kubota-san's point, next time we'll probably dig deeper. We have 2 items, one potentially to discuss, one potentially to decide. The conformance logo confirmation item came up from Helio on a different call. Helio is our board member from Cariad. Companies come to us and say, we're using one of your standards. Can you include our logo on your website? And Helio raised that we don't do a double check after the renewal cycle. In other words, after 18 months that they're still using the standard. Should we institute that or not? And I just want to flag for you that previously the OpenChain project has not partaken in any auditing or policing of the standards. We have left that to the supply chain, to procurement contract relationships, customer supplier relationships, and certifier relationships. Helio is just asking, do we want to consider having some form of audit, double check process regarding the companies with the logo on our website? No specific decision is needed, but it's definitely a discussion item. Does anyone have an opinion at this juncture?
Hey Shane, it's a good observation by Helio. I know he's not. I don't see him on the call. He's joined. No, I don't see him on the call. So, in my opinion, having accuracy is a good thing. But I also worry that if we come up with an auditing process and it's somehow incomplete, it'd be it could lead to some misimpressions as to the reliability of that information. I also, wonder if we have the enough bandwidth staffing wise to do that well. So, knowing that we have that issue, maybe we put an alternative is to put a notice on that page and just say, these are companies who at one point provided an indication, and people are advised to follow up with those companies if they believe that that's an important factor in some type of bilateral relationship.
Oh, I really like that. Quite frankly, we don't have the staffing resources to make an audit program. So it would be a big lift, but adding a disclaimer to the website appears to be a very low lift resolution to this.
Yeah, just an idea. Others might have additional ideas, but it, that's, I guess it's low hanging fruit for us if we wanted to do that.
This is why lawyers are useful.
Disclaimers. Yeah, lawyers love disclaimers.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'll take this idea to the board mailing list and give people an opportunity to comment further. I do notice Kubota-san has a comment.
Oh, thank you very much, Shane. Sorry, I had one question. Regarding the license compliance and the security review every 12 months, can we assume that the past version will not be affected?
Oh yeah. 5230-2020 will always remain a valid ISO standard and unchanged. It would just be if someone adopted 5230-2025, for example, that they would have that slight change. And the steering committee is perfectly valid to look at the final document and say, okay, annual sounds good. Let's put it 24 months. Let's put it 36 months. But 5230-2020 is never going to change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, conformance logo. I'm going to put the disclaimer concept to the board for discussion. I'll give people a week or two to mull it over. And if that's accepted, we will proceed with that. We're not doing it on this call because we don't have quorum from the board members on the call right now. Export control proposal. Actually, I want a motion on this, but I think it'll be quick. ScanOSS have open data on export control and they want to house it somewhere. They approached us and said, can we give it to you? Could you host it? Hosting export control open data databases appears to have nothing to do with our mission per se. And it would be a significant expansion of the areas where we operate. Therefore, it seems to be outside our normal remit. And I think perhaps what we can do is help them find a home elsewhere. I just want to take the board's temperature on that idea.
This is Dave. I agree, Shane, with your concept, with your suggestion.
Okay. I'll do the same thing as the last one. I'll send it to the board so they can have a week or two to digest. It seems polite that if someone comes to us and says, can you take this? We can say, well, it's not our thing, but maybe we can introduce you to Susan over at this project, which may be interested. All right. Any other business?
Is Shane?
Yeah,
This is Chris. Can you go back one slide?
Yep, done.
You've got export control proposal up there in the title, but the subject down here is actually ScanOSS hosting an open data project related to cryptographic open data.
Right. There's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say that is a very contentious subject depending on where you live.
Absolutely. And their stance
Okay.
was that their cryptographic open database was useful for export control because in the different jurisdictions, if you knew what the cutoff or trigger level was, the database could potentially help your tooling. But yeah, it's part of a much bigger picture, exactly as you said, Chris. Different jurisdiction, different cutoff level on cryptographic export control. And it's not our operational zone. So maybe we can introduce them to someone else like OpenSSF or similar. It just seems polite.
Yeah, because you could get yourself into an export control violation in country X because you had it out there available for anybody to come get it. And it was on
Yep.
a export control list.
Absolutely.
Just thinking.
It's it's a very valid point. And it's something that a couple of our board members, not on the call today, and export members had touched on previously. So it's useful to reiterate. All right, I'll formally send an email to the board saying, if you don't object, we'll help introduce them to someone else, not our job. Any other business? If not, we'll take a motion to approve on the hour here. Jimmy's not here because he's a slacker. Also, it's 4 a.m. in Sweden. So I'm going to do the motion to approve on behalf of Jimmy. He and Matthew have been absolute troopers to join this call at such crazy hours. And again, the crazy hours, it's a normal process here because we are on 3 continents. So one continent always suffers. Anyway, motion to approve to close the steering committee meeting. Who will provide the motion?
Motion. Dave.
Dave, wonderful. I'm not forgetting your name now. I have typed it correct.
It's too late.
It's too late, I know. Will anyone second?
Seki.
Seki-san, thank you. All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any objections? Any abstain? All right, we're approved, we've closed, and we're pretty much on time. Well done, everyone. Fantastic meeting. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Good meeting.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
You
Thanks,
too.
Jim.
Thank you.